Hello everybody, here we are today talking about how old teams fare in the NHL over the past 5 seasons, seeing how things have gone for them, and then what it could mean for some of the older teams in the league this upcoming season, and getting into that a bit. So before we get started, please make sure to subscribe if you're new to me, or hockey, whatever the case may be. That being said, let's get on into it. So like every other sport, you're always going to hear talk about youth versus experience, and there's a lot of concepts and ideas and theories about how rosters should be constructed, about how certain amount of players should be in this age category and whatnot. My opinion is kind of in the middle, where I don't think you should be the youngest team in the league unless you are a rebuilding side that is on the up and up with a lot of young draft picks that are seeing NHL time, and I don't think you should be the oldest team in the league unless you're striving to win a cup that season. So we get to talk now about some of the older teams in the league and seeing how those gray-haired rosters do. So now let's kick it off in the 2019-20 season and look at the teams that were youngest, oldest for the 5 oldest teams in the league, talk about how they did. So in order of youngest, oldest, you have the Nashville Predators, Dallas Stars, Minnesota Wild, New York Islanders, and then you had the Detroit Red Wings. And looking at all of this, one big positive for this is the fact that 4 out of these 5 teams ended up going on to make the playoffs. And interestingly enough, it was just Detroit, the league's oldest team, that ended up not making the postseason. But there was a couple of weird things when you looked at Detroit. They ended up having their top 6 scorers, I believe, that were 25 and younger, but they had multiple players that were older that were kind of dragging up the average age, if you will. You had guys like Jimmy Howard, you had guys like Valtteri Filppula, you had, who else was it? Oh yes, Jonathan Bernier, that were again making this roster a little bit older. And at that time, I don't think Detroit was especially looking to be a true contender, but they either way were still not a team that was capable of making it into the postseason. And looking at the playoffs in the 4 teams, there were a couple of positive things to look at here, primarily the fact that the New York Islanders made it to the conference final. Unfortunately, they did bow out to the eventual champions, but we also got to see the Dallas Stars make it, and then they lost in the Stanley Cup final to who else but the Tampa Bay Lightning. Who are you looking at here and saying, oh, why is Tampa Bay important? Because they were the 6th oldest team in the league. So if you're looking at the age of teams on average age, you could understand, hey, if we're a fan of the older teams winning, they literally just won the Stanley Cup and they were 6th oldest, so basically top 5. Then in the 2020-21 season, you would see the Dallas Stars, Detroit Red Wings, Minnesota Wild, New York Islanders, and Washington Capitals be the 5 oldest teams in the league. 3 out of the 5 would make it, while Dallas and then, of course, Detroit would go on to miss the playoffs. Dallas, of course, after they just made it to the Stanley Cup final, but that's neither here nor there. Unfortunately, though, if you're a fan of the veteran sides making it on deep runs like we saw the season prior to this, you would see the Minnesota Wild and then, of course, the Washington Capitals bow out in the first round, and that is not great. But you would see the New York Islanders, the 2nd oldest team, I believe, in the league, go on to make it to the conference finals. Actually, they lost in what was called the 3rd round because that year the divisions were set up really weird, but they would go on to lose to the Tampa Bay Lightning yet again, as the Bolts would go on to win a 2nd straight championship. And it's okay, though, because they are the 6th oldest team in the league at this time, with all of their core players being around that 30-year age mark, and it kind of speaks volumes to, again, these older teams are very capable of winning. And I don't really consider to be the 30-year mark old, but on average age they were, as they were able to go on there and then be another champion as their top 6. Fast forward a year and you would go on to see the Edmonton Oilers, Pittsburgh Penguins, Dallas Stars, Tampa Bay Lightning, and New York Islanders be the league's 5 oldest teams. And the good news is 4 out of those 5 teams made it to the playoffs, with the odd man out being the New York Islanders as the league's oldest team not making it to the playoffs. And while Dallas and Pittsburgh fell in the first round, I know that Pittsburgh fell to the Rangers in 7 games, you would go on to see the Edmonton Oilers make it to the conference finals for the first time in a long time, since 2006, and they would fall to the Colorado Avalanche. And then you would see the Tampa Bay Lightning appear in their 3rd straight Stanley Cup final as the league's 2nd oldest team by average age. Unfortunately, though, they ended up losing in the Stanley Cup final to the Colorado Avalanche, and this one is a little bit weird. We'll cover the Avs' average age at the end of this video, but it is an oddity in terms of how things have gone, as they weren't particularly old. Then in the 2022-23 season, you would see the Carolina Hurricanes, Washington Capitals, Boston Bruins, Tampa Bay Lightning, and Pittsburgh Penguins be the team's oldest teams in the league. And the results were a little bit weird this year, so you would see Washington and Pittsburgh, 2 teams that had been playoff mainstays for a very long time, fail to make it. And then the results for the playoffs also varied as well, as you would see the Boston Bruins and then the Tampa Bay Lightning bow out in the first round. Kind of surprising because they both had really good years. Tampa Bay, of course, had made it to the Stanley Cup final 3 straight years and had been a dominant team that got upset or knocked out, if you will, by the Toronto Maple Leafs of all teams. And then you would go on to see the Carolina Hurricanes get knocked out in the conference final in the East against the Florida Panthers. Florida would go on to play the Vegas Golden Knights and lose in the Stanley Cup Final. Vegas was the 7th oldest team by average age, meaning that, again, the old adage of being an experienced roster kind of holds true here, as Vegas was one of 3 teams to be 7th oldest in the league or older. Tampa Bay, of course, claiming the other 2, being 6th both years. Then in this past season, you would see the New York Islanders, the Washington Capitals, Seattle Kraken, Edmonton Oilers, and Pittsburgh Penguins be the league's oldest teams. 3 out of the 5 made it, but Pittsburgh and Seattle failed to do so. Really was pulling for Seattle to make it, just wasn't meant to be, hoping maybe this year will be. Anyway, back to the point, the Islanders ended up falling in the first round of the Carolina Hurricanes. That was a weird series. I just remember covering that and just being like, wow, points Carolina is dominating them. The fact that it made it to 6 games blows my mind. Anyway, the Washington Capitals would also get knocked out in the first round thanks to a sweep against the Rangers. That one was not the series I was hoping it would be. I was hoping it'd be a little bit more competitive, a little bit more dramatic, but New York took care of that in quick fashion. And then finally, it was the Edmonton Oilers that were the team that was the odd man out. They would go into the Stanley Cup Final. Problem is, they would go on to lose in Game 7. Very heartbreaking, as they lose to the Florida Panthers that were the 15th oldest team in the league by average age. So at this point, I've probably bored you enough, but we're still going to talk about my closing thoughts on this and my takeaways, and then talk about these teams that are the oldest and what it could mean for them this year. So looking at some of these takeaways, it's clear that you can be an old team and still go on deep runs. In fact, I think every season over the past 5 years, 3 out of the 5 teams that were the oldest every single season were able to make it to the playoffs, and multiple times you would see them go on deep runs. I think just about every year you would see them go to the conference finals, and maybe if they were lucky enough, go on to the Stanley Cup Final. Now, it is true that none of the top 5 teams by average age were able to win the Stanley Cup, but the teams that were going out there to win it most times, more than not, were the older teams. There was a few exceptions, of course, Florida this year, and then 2022, the Avs were the 18th oldest, but they still had a lot of players that were experienced. And again, you're not going to see a team full of 25-year-olds probably go out there and make it to the Stanley Cup Final and win it. And that's not to say it couldn't happen, but I think in general you do need to have some experience with the youth, and part of being a younger player is learning the game and learning from your mistakes, and just understanding that other players on other teams that are more experienced, that are probably in their prime, are at their peak for a reason. They've been there longer than you. They know the ins and outs of the game. They may be in better physical shape than you, and it's just the way it is. But now we're going to talk about the teams that are oldest this season and see what my thoughts are for them. So going into the season, at the moment, the 5 oldest teams by average age are the Detroit Red Wings, the Carolina Hurricanes, the Nashville Predators, the Pittsburgh Penguins, and the Edmonton Oilers. I know they have some older players, but it does shock me a little bit. What are some quick takeaways? Well, I think from what we've seen over the past few years and talking about these teams, yeah, there's multiple teams on this list that have gone on deep runs and could go out there and do it. I think Nashville is one of those teams that, while old, is going to be very, very fun, and I am hoping they are going to go on a deep run. They won't be the oldest team, and I do kind of hope that maybe Edmonton is a team to look out for, especially because they have a guy like Jeff Skinner that's not got to play in the playoffs ever before. So we'll see how this goes, because seeing Edmonton win the Cup especially would be kind of cool, knowing that they were just there last year. And while I'm not a huge Oilers fan, I'm not a hater by any means, it would be kind of nice to see them rebound after a heartbreaking Game 7 loss. But anyway, what are your thoughts on all this? And do you think that an old experienced team is going to be able to show the young guys how it's done and show that they are still capable of getting it done at the top level in the world? Let me know all that stuff down below in the comments. Please make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you're new. Everybody, please also make sure to stay safe. Have a great night. And Eagle of Hockey, all right. Goodbye, Brigadiers and Brigadettes. This is your captain signing off. Have a great night.